Return of the welcome call.
As time's moving on, the landscape around interruptive marketing is changing. When you look at other industries, if you look at the television industry, how that's facing the fact that consumers now have a new range of choices with PVRs where they can skip through ads. That industry is having to address the balance between how brands can communicate with consumers and how consumers can avoid communicating with those brands that they don't want to. The direct marketing industry is exactly the same, although the techniques are different. We're just having to face up to the way the world is developing and make sure that our members who do things legitimately and by a good and fair rule book don't get disadvantaged by the people who don't necessarily play by that fair rule book. Telemarketing is sustainable, but probably not in the model that we've had in the past, where large volumes of people are phoned on a poorly targeted basis. The future of all direct marketing pivots around the concept of targeting, even more so than the concepts of permission and opt-in. If you're communicating with people about things that are relevant and lively to them and that they want to hear about, then yes, of course it's sustainable. If you expect the model that you can run through hundreds of thousands of numbers with only the marginal knowledge of what the preferences or interests of the people are and expect them to not be upset at your interrupting their evening television viewing, then of course that's not really sustainable. So the future of telephone marketing is reasonably robust, but it's going to be based on mixtures of targeting and consent in the future, less of an acquisition tool for marketers, but more a tool to communicate with existing customers through. That's the future of the telephone.
Well, I'd like to think that the majority, if not 100% of DMA members already know what our code of practice requires, because it's been in place since 2002. However, we always took a position whereby we thought that this issue was so important to the industry that we would take a proactive measure to go out beyond our own membership and try and preach the gospel, so to speak. And therefore, we've never put any bar on the number of speaking engagements we undertake. Normally, we wouldn't address a group that wasn't actually with a membership. But on this issue, we've always taken the point that this was so important that there would be no bar to who we spoke to, where we spoke to, and the kind of information that we were able to deliver. And we've done that through every medium possible. I've done, obviously, a number of interviews and many other DMA members of staff have been responsible for promoting this issue and creating some awareness out there. But it is clear that some people either are totally ignorant of it or are riding roughshod over the regulations and over consumers' rights. This is a great shame, and obviously I find it enormously surprising, because just as a lay person it would be very difficult to have ignored all the column inches and all of the phone-in programs and TV coverage that there has been about silent calls.
Last year the DMA and the Telephone Preference Service commissioned some original research into the whole area of nuisance calls. And what we found was that the silent calls in particular were causing very high levels of consumer anxiety. And we further found that that anxiety is reduced if the consumer actually knows the identity of the person calling. So what the association did was very quickly change its code of practice to require that contact centres actually employ a CLI, which is a caller line identification, and that's a number which the consumer can then ring and find out who made that call, and it affords a mechanism for them to actually say that they don't want further calls in the future. What we also did was to set up a register of CLIs so that consumers could check if the number that was left was one that was actually used by a DMA member, so they could tell if they were being contacted by a DMA member and get more confidence from that. That was all sort of very well as far as members of the DMA were concerned. We enshrined all these higher standards in our code of practice, but unfortunately those companies that are not in membership are not bound by it. So simultaneously we worked very closely with the regulators like Ofcom and the Information Commissioner's Office to try and ensure similar high standards of the rest of the industry, and as a accumulation of effort, improve the experience of the consumer of telemarketing. The direct marketing industry has enjoyed tremendous growth over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's not surprising that an industry that has achieved that level of growth is going to also achieve a high degree of media comment and consumer attention. And it's absolutely critical, we believe, in the DM industry to ensure very high standards of practitioner conduct. So our sort of watchful eye covers all the sectors in the industry, whether it's an abuse of the mailing process, email spam, or these nuisance calls that are generated by predictive dialers. And we're very, very anxious to ensure that the consumer is treated with respect, and we recognise that the consumer interest is inextricably linked with the business interest. So it makes absolutely sense for us to fight that battle and generally raise standards across the industry.
I'm absolutely delighted. Obviously, for very personal reasons, I've been working on this issue for a number of years, but I believe that what we've been doing is absolutely right. In all but name, Ofcom has actually endorsed the Code of Practice, which we published in 2002. That validates all of our work. Had everybody been following our Code of Practice, one has to say that we wouldn't have a problem of silent calls. That's sadly not the case. Now everybody has to follow what is essentially an endorsed DMA Code of Practice, and clearly I'm delighted.
The DMA membership promise to undertake direct marketing activity to higher standards than those that are not in membership, and we're very anxious to ensure that that promise is borne out. So we police it very stringently. We've set up a member compliance team that proactively watch member behaviour. We send out questionnaires, we do visits to member companies, and we do spot checks of their activities. So we're very concerned to ensure that they are adhering to the higher standards that they say they are. On top of that, we are working with regulators all the time to help us tackle errant behaviour and bring to account those companies that flatly refuse to abide by these higher standards. And the goal at the end of the day is to treat the consumer better and in turn increase the profitability of the DMA member.
Companies should be members of the Direct Marketing Association, because if they're involved in direct marketing in the UK, it's the body that is there to make sure that the landscape that they use to make money is the one that's protected and has a balance between the rights of consumers and the rights of industry, and make sure that legislators and regulators don't over-legislate but put sensible legislation in to make sure that their businesses can prosper. It's also an environment where you can learn a great deal, where if you follow the code of practice that the Direct Marketing Association has to hand and applies to all members, you're gonna be playing one with the big boys, and two, you're going to be playing to a set of rules that means that largely you're not going to get in trouble either with consumers or with legislators for being at the fringes of what is deemed good practice. Good practice, protecting the way we do business, making more money, that's what the DMA is about.
Well, I think increasingly we're finding that companies want to join the DMA if they weren't already in membership, because they see the leading role that the DMA has played in resolving what was a very huge risk to the whole industry of telemarketing. It has been the DMA's sort of persistence and doggedness in working to bring these companies to book, the ones that were abusing the consumer, and generally getting regulatory support to tackle them, that has really positioned the DMA as part of the solution to the problem and not part of the problem itself. So I think increasingly companies now are seeing that being part of this body helps them to either predict or ultimately influence the future direction of the legal and regulatory framework. And they see it really as a safeguard to be in the tent helping shape the industry that they are working in.